At World Relief, we often get a lot of questions around refugee and asylum and border and immigration issues. Lots of really good questions. One of the most common questions that I hear relates to economics. The question is often something along the lines of, can we afford to welcome refugees and other immigrants when there's so many people in need in our own country? The vast majority of economists believe that the net economic impact of immigration is actually very positive for the United States and has been throughout American history. That's true whether you're looking at a specific subgroup of immigrants like refugees, or even if you look at immigrants who are here unlawfully. In fact, a survey by the Wall Street Journal a few years back found that 96% of economists believe that the net economic impact for the United States of illegal immigration has been positive. Now, that's not to say that every immigrant's contribution is positive, but the net effect almost certainly is. And that shouldn't surprise us as Christians, because we believe that every human being, regardless of your country of origin or your nationality, your language, your religion, is made in the image of God. And that both means that human beings have dignity and value that is worth protecting, but also that human beings have potential, because we are made in the image of a creator, to create and to contribute. And that's what we see immigrants doing throughout American history, and certainly our experience at World Relief has been that they're eager to continue doing so. Another very significant concern that people have relates to safety and security. For example, sometimes people wonder, how do we know that immigrants who are coming into the United States have been vetted adequately? Well, there are different categories of immigrants, of course. Many of the individuals that World Relief works with are immigrants who are categorized as refugees. That means that the US government has considered their case overseas, verified that they meet the legal definition of a refugee, which is to say they have fled a well-founded fear of persecution on account of their race, their religion, their political opinion, their national origin, or their particular social group. And then they went through a thorough vetting process overseas before they were allowed to get onto an airplane and come to the United States. In fact, refugees go through the most thorough vetting of any category of visitor or immigrant who comes into the United States. Because that process is so thorough and so secure that we actually have a remarkable history of security in the refugee resettlement program. Since the Refugee Act was signed into law back in 1980, there's been about 3.5 million refugees resettled to the United States, and not a single one of them has taken the life of an American citizen in an Islamist terrorist attack perpetrated in the United States. I can't promise that there can never be a security concern, and we think it's appropriate for our government to continually be improving that vetting process. But it is also a mistake to so only fixate on the question of security and forget to ask the question that was asked of Jesus, which is, who is my neighbor? And if it's a family arriving at the airport, to be there to welcome them. Now, it's also fair to ask, well, what about other immigrants who don't necessarily come through that particularly secure vetting process for refugees? What about those who come across the border, including some who might be unvetted altogether, who are sneaking past the Border Patrol? We've been really clear at World Relief for a long time that we think that it's a responsibility of government to ensure that we have secure borders. That is to say, our government should know who's coming into the country and should do everything reasonably possible to keep out anyone seeking to do harm. And we're not naive to the reality that there are people who would want to do harm to the United States. But what's not necessarily fair to presume is that people who have come unlawfully, who either crossed the border unlawfully, often many years ago, or potentially who overstayed a temporary visa, are disproportionately a threat to public safety. And I say that because there's a great deal of data on that question. Of course, a few immigrants who are unlawfully in the country have committed serious violent crimes, and our view is that those people should be deported. But the vast majority have not. In fact, the best evidence of this comes out of the state of Texas. It's the only state out of 50 that tracks the immigration legal status of felony convictions. And what they find consistently over a number of years, and whether you're looking at violent crime or property crime or drug crime, is that native-born US citizens actually have significantly higher rates of crime per capita than immigrants, whether they're lawfully present or unlawfully present. And that's not to say that we should be afraid of our US citizen neighbors. Just to say that it's not particularly rational to be uniquely afraid of our immigrant neighbors. It's also probably not because our immigrant neighbors are morally superior. In some cases that might be true, but what's probably more at play there is consequences. Because immigrants deal not only with the US criminal justice system that any US citizen would deal with if they commit a crime, they then get turned over to the immigration legal system. Even if they're here lawfully, there's a serious possibility that they could face deportation if they've committed a felony offense, which gives them a strong disincentive towards criminal behavior. One other concern that I hear often, especially in the last few years, relates to drugs. It is true that a lot of illegal drugs, including really awful hard drugs like fentanyl, come from or through Mexico. But sometimes people presume that that is coming with immigrants crossing the border illegally, and it almost never is. The reality is that about 90% of the fentanyl that's apprehended coming across the border from Mexico is apprehended at lawful ports of entry. And it is apprehended most of the time, about 90% of the time, on U.S. citizens who are coming into the country lawfully. Now, that's frankly a business decision from the drug cartels, which are evil, but also not stupid. And they're not going to put their very valuable contraband product on people who are crossing the border unlawfully and more likely than not to be caught and searched. Instead, they put it with lawful citizens, for the most part, who are crossing the border lawfully and are unlikely to be apprehended. Now, I don't have a solution to that. I wish that I did. This is an issue that's affected close friends of mine personally, and I understand the desire to want to find a solution to this problem. But the reality is, even if we could stop 100% of illegal immigration at the US-Mexico border, we'd probably be solving at most 10% of this problem. The last misconception that I think comes up often is around the question of legality. I think, especially for Christians, there's maybe a conflicting feeling here. On the one hand, we want to love and welcome people and share the gospel with people, but we also want to follow the law. There are biblical reasons to be concerned with both of these ideas. Romans chapter 13 tells us to be subject to the governing authorities that God has established. So should we love and welcome people, or should we follow the law? The good news is, in most cases, we don't have to make that choice, because we can love and welcome people, regardless of if we know their legal status, and we're not breaking any laws. There's nothing in the law at the federal level or at the state level that would say that if you are a church welcoming someone into your congregation, that you have to verify their legal status, or that if somehow you would find out about their legal status, that you're required to report that. The same would be true with a church running an English language class or a food pantry or clothing closet. We can love and welcome people and show people the love of Jesus, and we're not violating any laws. Now, this is a harder question for our brothers and sisters in Christ who are in that situation of having either crossed the border unlawfully or overstayed a temporary visa. But what I've learned in my many years at World Relief, working as an immigration legal counselor for many years, is that the vast majority of people who are in that situation, many of whom are brothers and sisters in Christ, are actually desperate to get right with the law. They're not necessarily looking for an amnesty that says you broke the law, it's forgiven and forgotten. They would be willing to do just about anything to earn the opportunity to stay lawfully in the United States with their families. That's why what we've said at World Relief for many years is there ought to be the opportunity for immigrants who are unlawfully in the country to come forward, pay a fine. So it's not an amnesty, it's not a free pass, there's a consequence to the violation of law, but then there'd be the opportunity for people to earn permanent legal status and eventual citizenship if they're willing to meet those requirements. We think that's a way to both honor the law, the way that Romans chapter 13 advises us to do, but also to respect the unity of the family, which is another biblical value, and to show compassion. Knowing the facts is really important, and we want to make sure that we're grounding our policy decisions based on the realities on the ground and with the communities that we're serving. But what's also really important is that we're starting our conversation and ending on our policy perspectives with the scriptures, that we're thinking about these issues first and foremost as Christians who want to honor God in the way that we address these important national issues.